And that's why
I'm getting confused here, though. Are you thinking this is engineered?
Yeah, totally.
The whole thing, the shutdown of the economy.
Yes,
that it wasn't done to protect people. That it was done.
In my opinion, that part was done. That was needed one way or the other. They could have done climate change, asteroids from space. I don't give a fuck. They needed to shut it down. They needed to stop the money flow to fix it and get more permission to print money to flood into the system.
Hey guys, thank you for clicking on the video. Really appreciate your support. Today we're going to be breaking down a clip from the recent episode with Joe Rogan and Adam Curry, episode 1716, where Adam Curry believes that the whole 2008 market crash and tearing down the economy, and then the most recent crash that happened in March of 2020 due to the pandemic, was actually engineered by somebody. We don't know who. We can assume maybe the government, the banks, the Federal Reserve, the powers that be, the invisible hand. We don't really know. But I want to just focus in on his opinion about the similarities between the 08 crash and the most recent crash in 2020, where basically he goes on to explain how in 08 they crashed the economy due to the housing market, pumped a lot of money, the banks took a lot of loans, and then more recently he says that they purposely shut down the economy, and the excuse this time was the pandemic, but it didn't necessarily have to be the pandemic. It could have been anything. But basically he's stating that we needed to shut down the economy. And how were we gonna do it? Well, we don't know. And Joe Rogan even pushes him, asking him whether or not he believes if we would go as far as saying that the lab leak of the virus was actually done on purpose, but he won't go that far. But what he is saying is that he believes the whole shutdown of the economy was done on purpose so that they can print more money and pump it back into the system. But before we get into it, I recommend everybody to listen to the podcast. But let's start right before this, the topic of the video, where Joe Rogan asked Adam Curry if he believes that Joe Biden is actually running anything. And before we get into it, I want to take a look at the clip with Charlemagne the God and Kamala Harris. But just to show you guys, I don't know who's watching this video. It could be people on the left, people on the right. But regardless of who it is, this isn't just a right-wing sentiment. I think the whole country right now kind of feels that Joe Biden is absent and we don't hear much from him. So let's hear Charlemagne the God ask Kamala Harris who is the real president and see her respond.
Who's the superhero that's going to speak against Joe Manchin? No. I want to know who's the real president of this country. Is it Joe Biden or Joe Manchin?
I'm sorry, I interrupted. I don't think the vice president can hear you. It's Simone. I'm so sorry, Charlemagne. We have to wrap.
She can hear me.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me, Madam Vice President?
So I'm sorry, we got to wrap.
Oh.
So I'm sorry to interrupt.
They're acting like they can't hear me.
Do you guys see this? It's hilarious. So he asked her who the real president is, and immediately, just like they've done with Joe Biden, because we've all seen his gaffe, so they can't let him talk for too long, they interrupt, pretend that they can't hear them, and it's so obvious that they're lying and they're just interjecting right now so that she doesn't have to answer the question, that even Charlemagne says, like, hey, they can hear me. But let's see her response now that she's been given a few seconds to come up with one.
I can hear you.
Oh, so
can hear you.
So who's the real president of this country? Is it Joe Manchin or Joe Biden, Madam Vice President?
Come on, Charlemagne.
Come
on. It's Joe Biden.
I can't tell sometimes.
No.
Thought that was a little funny to interject. So let's get back into the Joe Rogan part.
Like, what do you think? Do you think Biden has real? Like, what kind of relationship do you think Biden has with control as the president?
Oh, okay. Well, zero. And I'll tell you why. I think most, if not all, of what we're living through right now is a financial issue. It's not a health issue. Of course it is, but the real issue is a financial issue. And what's come to bear, in my opinion, and this is kind of recent information, is that, the 2008, 2009 housing crisis, that was fixed by printing a shitload of money, trillions of dollars, and pushing it off into very difficult to explain how the financial system works. I'm not qualified, but I do understand in general lines what's happened. That's now come to bear. Someone has to pay the piper. And it kind of happens in central bank controlled economies, which is what we have with the Federal Reserve. So it's a bunch of banks that really manage our money. They create it, they spend it, they do all kinds of stuff with it. We borrow from them. It's a very convoluted system. Now I lost my train of thought. That's not fair.
It's that LA weed, bitch.
Come on, Jamie, where was I?
Convoluted system.
Right, the convoluted. Okay. So that's the balance sheet is out of whack, and it can jeopardize everything. We could have a crash of epic proportions.
Right.
And it happens about every 10 years. If you think about all the crises we have, so we had 2008, but then before that we had 2001, 9/11. We had 87 before that. There's been all these crashes around 10 years. Kind of the system has to reset, but it's compounding. You know, our national debt, which is all just kind of fictional shit, is probably quadrillions really, but doesn't matter.
Why do you think that?
But wait for it. 2019, just before the outbreak of the Wuhan flu at the time, as we jokingly called it, there was a huge problem with interbank lending, and how that works is irrelevant. But as we now know, because that information just came out 2 weeks ago, J.P. Morgan, Chase, Morgan Stanley, Citibank, and Goldman Sachs collectively borrowed $11.7 trillion just before the pandemic started.
I want to pause the clip right there real quick and just go to the article that he's referencing. To be honest, it's not from one of the major media outlets, but obviously this kind of information wouldn't be published by them. But I think what he's referencing is this article by the Wall Street on Parade that was published on January 6, 2022. The headline reads, "Wall Street banks have an alibi for their $11.2 trillion emergency repo loans from the Fed." Then I also have pulled up this article by Vox, where the Federal Reserve basically came out last year, and they said that they were going to offer 1.5 trillion in short-term loans. Some of the issues that we see with this is brought up obviously by Bernie Sanders, Alexander Cortez, when they talk about when we say it's time to provide healthcare to all our people, we're told we can't afford it. But if the stock market is in trouble, no problem. The government can just hand out 1.5 trillion to calm bankers on Wall Street. And then right here we see AOC's tweet. The major issue with this is that, the sentiment from the working class people like you and me is that going back to 2008, where basically all the banks and Wall Street was bailed out, and CEOs still received bonuses so they can keep them on the team, and many of Americans lost their homes, and the working class was pretty much left to pick up the scraps and figure it out on their own. And much of the same here. We see all the money and lending that the bank was doing. In this case here, we see the $11.2 trillion.
When the Wall Street shit happened in 2008, 2009, it was about 8 trillion. And something was fucked up in the system. Then it melted down. Here, they melted down the economy by shutting everybody down. Shut that shit down. And now we've got all this money coming into the system. CARES Act, 2 trillion, just trillions and trillions of dollars that are just being created. They need it to keep the whole system alive. And that's why
I'm getting confused here, though. Are you thinking this is engineered?
Yeah, totally.
The whole thing to shut down the economy?
Yes.
That it wasn't done to protect people, that it was done...
In my opinion, that part was done. That was needed one way or the other. They could have done climate change, asteroids from space. I don't give a fuck. They needed to shut it down. They needed to stop the money flow to fix it and get more permission to print money to flood into the system. There's too much on the banking side and not enough on the people side. Go figure. They've been stealing it. So they had to give people money. And that's what they did. They printed stimulus checks. In Texas today, if you and I start a consulting company, which is to motivate people to get vaccinated, we can get a grant of up to $1 million.
What?
Yes, this is how much money there is for this shit. And that goes into the system. And that's what they needed to balance out this complete piece of crap. Now, is that going to work? I mean,
But here's the question. Do you think that it was engineered up until the point of releasing a virus? How far do you go with this?
That's hard to say. I mean, maybe it was just a virus and it was made worse. I mean, they had practice for this, so they could trigger muscle memory with the people who were in that Vent 201 drills and everything. That's not that hard to do. And then, well, interestingly, I feel Dr. Malone didn't do a good job of explaining mass formation.
All right, my fellow Sims, there you have it. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think, what you want me to cover, and I can try to make these videos better for you guys. See you guys next time.